Full stack developer, someone who works by just sitting, typing 6 to 9 words per minute, and getting a not that bad amount of money if you live in the Philippines. For a lot of people, it is a dream, and it makes sense because of work from home, flexibility, and a pwede na salary. But what does it take to become one? Let's take this roadmap as a guide. Before we proceed, if you don't know what a full stack is, it is a web application that has the front end and the back end. Front end is what the user sees, while back end is what processes the user's request. If a user wants to check out this item, the user needs to click this button and a lot will happen in the back end. Now that we have an idea of full stack application, let's talk about the first part, the front end. Front end can be in the form of mobile or web. My forte is more on web, so we're not gonna talk about mobile in this video. For web, you probably heard about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML is the structure of a web app, CSS is the style, and JavaScript is the functionality. A very common analogy for this is a car. HTML is the body or the chassis of a car, CSS is the paintwork, and the JavaScript is the engine that makes a car move from location X to location Y. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are the roots of all of these front-end applications. But working with them alone is very hard to do. We need to use some tools that can make our front-end development a lot easier. And that's why they invented front-end framework. Think of a front-end framework as a tool to achieve things that is very hard to achieve when using vanilla technologies. When I say vanilla technologies, it means raw, or we are not using any framework or any helper. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Some challenges that we may encounter when using vanilla technologies are handling states, making app reactive, unorganized files, messy code, and a lot of other things. There are several front-end frameworks that we can choose from, but if you're an absolute beginner, I highly suggest learning React.js because it is stable, popular, tons of community support, easy to understand syntax, a lot of job postings that requires React, and other good stuff. To start with React.js, you must have a decent knowledge of JavaScript. No need to perfect it, but at least you know the basic to intermediate topics like variables and data types, operators, if-else statements, loops, function, the manipulation, and you can build a simple website that uses vanilla JavaScript. So, assuming you are now comfortable with JS, here are some of the React.js topics you must learn. Remember that these are just the minimum knowledge to acquire, and these are non-negotiable. Components, which are the building blocks of React, JSX or JavaScript XML, which combines HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in a single JS file instead of in a HTML file. Properties or props is just the data to pass onto a component. Think of it as an argument and parameter in a function. State, the current look of the UI that can be changed without reloading the page, and hooks. These are the pre-written React functions to achieve or solve specific tasks or problems. Again, you must learn all of this without any exceptions. We already solved the web reactivity problem. But what about the style? React plus vanilla CSS is fine, but combining React with CSS framework is a lot better. You can also choose from a several CSS framework, but I would suggest just Tailwind. Why? Because Tailwind is simple, productive, fast, and is being used by many developers. To start with Tailwind, you need to understand that your approach to writing CSS will be completely different. Everything is in clustering. For example, if you want to add a margin to the top, you're going to add empty, dash, and then a number. By default, numbers here don't really mean it is pixels. It's just a preset size of Tailwind and you can see it when you hover it. But if you want to explicitly set PyPX, for example, you need to put the number inside the square brackets. You can also use EM, REM, VH, or any other units. You must be comfortable with writing for the sake of functionality rather than the beauty, because you might end up having a class name this long. Now that we already know what tools to use, let's talk about the what. What do you need to build? I can't stress enough how important it is to create projects. I know it's kind of boring, especially if that project cannot be used for a real world application, but trust me, I can speak from experience that it will going to be very worth it. And aside from that, as early as now, learn the process of learning things because in a real world scenario, this is going to be a reality. So choose one project, stick to it, and finish it. My suggestion is a personal blog site because it is simple and will teach you the front end basics, API calls, or fetch. It can also be used in the real world and you can also make money out of it. So everything in the front end is now set up. Again, these are just minimum requirements. Please learn at least these concepts. You can add more, but I suggest not to yet unless you fully understand this and you can build a blog site quickly. Backend is very crucial, critical, and fundamental. Once someone gets into your backend, that person can manipulate, modify, or even delete all of your data. Because the backend is where all of our data is coming from, it is also where we process and save them. So we really need to make it secure. In backend development, you can use pretty much any language and technologies you want. You're not forced to use JavaScript only, though you can, but it's not required. Some popular languages of choice are Python, Ruby, Java, C Sharp, JavaScript, or Node.js. A lot of full stack developers use this so that they only use one language for both front end and back end. And a trending language nowadays is Go. Based on my experience, most enterprise and established companies use either Java or C Sharp, while startups and developing companies use Python or JavaScript. Just remember, you cannot learn all of this. Just pick one language, then learn as much as you can. I started with Python because in college we had a Python subject and I fell in love with it. It is much easier to learn, lots of libraries, and a faster language to develop with. But you are free to choose whatever language you are comfortable to work with. The concepts remain the same regardless of the language. Now, just like in front end development, it's possible to create backend without a framework, but it is much harder. Since we are dealing with data, security, and efficiency, that's why having a framework will change the game for us. There are three most popular Python backend framework we can choose from: Django, Flask, Fast API. These three offers different features for different uses, but I prefer Flask for simplicity. This is also what we used in my previous company, by the way. Just like in React, there are minimum language software to really understand Flask. Again, non-negotiable. Those are Flask syntax, Flask RESTful library, routing, causal dynamic routing, forms and validation, request and response, decorators, sessions and cookies, and database integration. At this point, I know that it is already intimidating for us to learn all of these things, especially if you are an absolute beginner. But this is what full stack development is, and I've been in your situation before, and I overcame it. So, wag ka mainip, okay? Now, backend's not complete if we can save our data or the user's data. That's why we need a database. A database is just a place where we save and retrieve data. There are two types of databases. SQL, which structure is in the form of tables with rows and columns like MySQL and PostgreSQL. And NoSQL, an object-based database with key value pair, just like MongoDB. No need to worry about them for now. Just use MySQL since I believe we somehow learn it in a university. Using raw SQL is not good choice because it will be hard to maintain, read, and understand. A lot of developers prefer using an object relational mapper or ORM. It is to simplify the process of working with database. And since we use Flask, we can use SQL Alchemy to help us with that. Learn this concept: database connection, Python class, and instance. Because of ORM, columns and rows are presented by classes and instances. Migration, queries, and CRUD operations. Full stack development takes a lot of time to learn, but it is a skill that most companies are looking for. A bonus part about this video is deployment. Assuming we completed the blog site, how can people outside your network access it? That's when we do deployment. Basically, the idea of deployment is uploading your web application to a computer that is running 24/7, and people all around the globe have access to it. You can also do it at your home, but it takes a complicated process to achieve. And are you willing to keep your laptop or computer running 24 hours? For me, it's not worth it. So, to deploy your app, you need two servers or computers, one for the front end and one for the back end. For the React front end, you can use Vercel or Netlify. For the Flask back end, you can use Python Anywhere or a VPS, just like DigitalOcean Droplet. Deploying the back end is harder than front end, and I may create a separate video about it in the future. Let me know in the comments if you are interested, but the idea is just the same regardless of the technology. And once you already did that, congratulations, you just made your first full stack application, which you can add to your portfolio and showcase the technologies you learned: JavaScript, React, Tailwind, Python, Flask, SQL Alchemy, MySQL, Vercel, and VPS on DigitalOcean.